Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order and do roll call.
Dr. Sullivan,
Here.
Ms. Esri,
Here.
Ms. Bowler, Dr. Getkin, here, Dr. Grant,
Here.
Dr. Nunez,
Here.
Ms. Pulowski,
Here.
Ms. Shefelt,
Here.
Dr. Waterhouse is absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. First, I'd like to introduce, and it's my pleasure to introduce two new members to the MDC. First is Dr. Jenny Getkin. She's a graduate of the University of Illinois College of Veterinary Medicine. Her mother is a nurse and her father a veterinarian. From her personal experience with her own family pets and her experience with her clients' end-of-life decisions, she decided to dedicate her practice to in-home euthanasia for family pets. Her website has a beautiful logo that says, and I quote, "Fond farewell, because home is where love lives," unquote. I always felt that the most important part of our job as veterinarians was to help support our clients with the difficult end-of-life decisions. Thank you, Jen, for doing that difficult and important work. Jen is also very familiar with the Veterinary Medical Board. She has been a hospital inspector, a subject matter expert, and now she is a consultant reviewing and screening disciplinary cases for the board. Welcome, Dr. Getkin. Our next member needs no introduction, so I won't give him one. Just kidding, just kidding. It is Dr. Mark Nunez. Mark did his undergraduate work at UCLA and graduated from UCD School of Veterinary Medicine. He is a highly respected longtime small animal veterinarian in Los Angeles, presently serving as medical director of VCA Miller Robertson Animal Hospital in Los Angeles. Dr. Nunez has been very busy outside his practice, both in organized veterinary medicine and regulatory medicine. He was on the board of the Southern California VMA and its president during his term, also serving on this California Veterinary Medical Board and served as its president. He is now on the board of AAVSB, which is a difficult role because he's addressing issues across all state boards, not just California. And most important, he has been on the California Veterinary Medical Board, serving as its president for 2 terms, and dealt with several very difficult and challenging issues. Welcome, Mark.
It's good to be back.
I would also like to thank the board for giving us an amazing group of MDC members, 6 present or past board members, another who has worked extensively with the board and enforcement, and 2 additional RVTs who bring a great knowledge base of the world of RVT support. And boy, do we have work for them. Okay, now agenda item 3, public comments on items not on the agenda. Are there any comments from the room? Seeing none, moderator, could you open the online to any comments from the public?
Absolutely. We are now open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand. And for our mobile device users, you have 3 different screens and only one of them has a hand button, so you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand. We're going to give everyone 3 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a 15-second warning before your time expires. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, you wish to continue with the agenda?
Thank you. Item 4 is review and approval of April 16th, 2024 committee meeting minutes. Any comments or corrections from the committee? Seeing none, are there any comments from the public in the room? All right. Let's have a motion to accept.
I'll move to accept the minutes.
I'll second that.
Any discussion from the committee? Okay, so we'll open it up for discussion from the public. Being none in the room, moderator, could you open it up for comment online?
We are open for public comment on the motion for accepting the meeting minutes. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of your screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Dr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Ms. Esri,
Yes.
Ms. Bowler, Dr. Gecken, Dr. Grant,
Yes.
Dr. Nunez,
Abstain.
Ms. Pulowski,
Yes.
Ms. Felt,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, agenda item 5, update discussion and potential recommendations regarding records. I would first like to thank staff for its extensive background material provided for this memorandum. The background is critical to get everyone up to date on these issues and feel comfortable with the discussions. And I am sure that there will be more issues raised during the discussion. I also want to thank the stakeholders, particularly CVMA and CHRB, for their work and time, working with us, addressing their concerns, and to get everyone to the best results possible. We cannot think of every scenario that will come up, and more importantly, we shouldn't try to address every scenario. There always will be a need for interpretation based upon the intent of the regulations. At the end of the day, the two main purposes that I see for written records are, 1, continuity of care, and 2, a record of the process that guided the veterinarian in the care of the patient. In other words, in the defense of the veterinarian. Since we've set out the agenda and material for the meeting, we have received 2 letters for public comment, and we will address them during our discussion. Marie will start off with item A, and then I will address B and C. So I'll turn it over to Marie.
Since May 2023, the subcommittee has worked with industry stakeholders to address concerns raised regarding record-keeping requirements. In December 2023, the subcommittee provided legislative and regulatory proposals to CVMA and CHRB. Those proposal recommendations were approved by the MDC with a minor amendment at its January 2024 meeting. After approving the recommendations in the legislative proposal, the MDC made additional amendments to the regulatory proposal. Some of those amendments were intended to mirror the legislative proposal, but those edits were not reflected in the MDC's final motion on the legislative proposal. To rectify the inconsistency, the subcommittee amended the legislative proposal to include requirements to provide a copy of written records to the client or the client's authorized agent during an emergency or for direct transfer to another veterinary premises to ensure subsequent veterinarians have sufficient information regarding the animal patient's condition. As this provision was proposed to be added to the statute, the previously approved regulatory proposal no longer includes this text. Since the board was unable to meet in January, they were unable to discuss the legislative proposal until the April board meeting. During that meeting, CVMA cautioned the board against the legislative proposal, stating in part that once changes are placed in statute, the board loses control. It was recommended that if the board were to make a statutory change, the board could make the change with less wording and leave a lot of it back in regulation. The board's executive officer and board counsel clarified that the legislative amendment was necessary because the current statute only requires a summary to be provided to the client. Without a statutory amendment, the board would not have the authority to require a copy be provided. CVMA raised additional concerns about the requirement to provide copies of the medical records at the time of request when there is an emergency, as did Dr. Peter Bowie in public comment via his letter that Dr. Sullivan referenced earlier. Due to the concerns raised related to the legislative and regulatory proposals, the board referred the proposals back to the MDC. On May 13th, the subcommittee met with CVMA and CHRB to work through the concerns related to the legislative proposal. CVMA raised concerns that veterinarians in the field, such as equine and large animal practitioners, likely do not have access to computers to create written records and do not have time to handwrite records upon request. In practice, when a large animal patient is being referred to another veterinarian, the treating veterinarian can call the receiving veterinarian to communicate necessary information to facilitate the continuity of care. Dr. Peter Bowie's letter echoed these concerns from the viewpoint of a small animal emergency veterinarian. It was also discussed that there may be instances when a client chooses not to take the animal patient to a second veterinarian immediately upon leaving the first veterinarian's care. The second veterinarian may also be unknown at the time that the animal patient is picked up from the first veterinarian. After that meeting, the subcommittee developed amendments to address these concerns and then met with CVMA and CHRB on May 20th to review this proposal. No additional concerns were raised at that time. So I think you can see the proposal on the screen now for 4855 to read A veterinarian subject to the provisions of this chapter shall, as required by regulation of the board, keep a written record of all animals receiving veterinary services and provide a copy of that record to the client or their authorized agent within 5 days of receiving the client's or their authorized agent's verbal or written request. B, if requested verbally or in writing by the client or their authorized agent because the animal is in critical condition or direct transfer to another veterinary premises for medical care is recommended, the veterinarian, upon release of the animal patient from the veterinarian's care, shall either, 1, provide a copy or a summary of the written record to the client or their authorized agent, or 2, if a written record is not available upon release of the animal patient, communicate information to facilitate continuity of care of the animal patient either to A, the receiving veterinarian or veterinary premises, or B, the client or their authorized agent if the receiving veterinary premises is unknown. C, the minimum amount of information that shall be included in written records and summaries shall be established by the board. And D, the minimum duration of time for which a registered veterinary premises shall retain the written record or complete copy of the written record shall be determined by the board.
Okay, are there any comments or discussion from the committee? Kathy?
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody in the subcommittee. This has been going on a while, and I know we've talked about it at length here and at the board and everything. But I still have a question, and as a public, and as a client that's a lay person here, I really still have real concerns. I understand some of the reasoning, but I have concerns about B, which is if the written record's not available, they either communicate the information to the receiving veterinarian or to the client, their authorized agent, if the receiving. And I assume that communication in this instance is oral because there's no written record available, correct? Or it could
Yes.
be. So what I am worried about here as a layperson is I don't think it's really fair to the consumer to have to absorb and understand the terms, et cetera, in a high stress emergency situation. I guess I've always had records provided or transferred or whatever. But I consider myself a really engaged, knowledgeable, and a pet owner. But there are times when you've had to, when I don't think I could be trusted to transfer that information correctly. So I understand that people in the equine profession, they can't do written records. I'm just wondering, is there nothing that could be done in any kind of form of writing, like on an iPad, a text with some minimal information that doesn't put the onus on the consumer to have this information and carry it forward to another vet?
The issue that this is trying to address, and the way that that B came about was if the referring veterinarian does not know where that animal is going and can't do that, and they may go later, in the event that the consumer has to go in the interim before those records are prepared, they have to have some sort of information. How do we communicate that information when we don't know if they're going somewhere or where they're going? So
A lot of
just-
vets, if they're not open 24/7, you've got to release the animal, right?
Yeah.
And the client has to take it, and they may not. In this day and age, sometimes it's hard to find an emergency practice you're going to go to. But I just know that I just think that's a lot to put on the consumer. I think for consumer protection and actually patient protection, there should be something in writing somehow. I don't want to make it too onerous for the veterinarian, but that explains the condition of the pet or the animal being transferred.
So I think that the key here is if a written record is not available.
Right.
So that narrows the spectrum down tremendously.
Yeah,
It
I'm sure
makes
it doesn't happen very often.
it makes it an ambulatory issue. Okay? I mean, otherwise, if you're in a fixed practice, medical records or summary is going to be available. So if a written record is not available, here are the two options. And it says communication. So that could be a written notes or it could be verbal. It's communicating. So the reason we put in B is that if the referring veterinarian does not know where the animal is going, they can't call them.
Right. No, I
Okay.
totally see that.
So then if we don't have B, you're putting all of the responsibility on the veterinarian in a situation that they can't complete. So I think that there's enough safeguards here because if there is a complaint, if there's a disciplinary case, the issue is going to be looked at in the context of one, is the written record not available? That's number one.
Mhm.
And two, what was the situation then that followed? So that the veterinarian has a way that he can get the information to the next entity. And we're still talking about 5 days here. If they can't get the information immediately, if the client isn't going immediately to a referral, then the next day or the day after, they can get that information from the veterinarian. So I think we have to have some latitude here. I don't think we can, answer every scenario. And I think the fact that it narrows it to the fact that only if written records are not available, that these are the other two options. We have to have some freedom there, some way of giving some options to that veterinarian. Christy?
Kathy, I was in your same shoes at the last meeting, and I felt very strongly the same thing. It's like, how this just doesn't seem right. And I think Dr. Nolan helped me the most and explaining that they do their best, right? They're trying, they're out on a farm, they're out somewhere, and they're trying to help this patient. And most of the time, they're calling the other veterinarian. However, there are times when that just can't happen. It's just not realistic. And so she really stressed upon me to understand that we need to be able to step back and away from the small animal world and understand that large animal is very different. And they cannot always say, you're going to this other doctor and they're on their way in transport, because it just doesn't happen, because they just can't, they don't always know where they're going to go, because it's more about getting that animal loaded and get it safely loaded and say, you're on your way. And when you're on your way, let me know and I'll try to contact that veterinarian and let them know, and I'm going to call them. But sometimes they're just trying to get to the next veterinarian.
No, I totally get that. My question is, it just seems like there would be a way, it may not be in a record-keeping system that's formalized, that something in some form of communication other than oral, when somebody's loading a horse into a trailer, about what the situation is and what you need to tell the vet, could be provided by the current treating vet.
They try.
And I know they try, and
try
I'm
to
sure
make a
9
phone
times out of
call,
10
right.
they can. It's just that I worry that we're putting it onto the client. So.
Sarah?
There's also a separate provision under the statute that allows communication directly between the veterinarians, right? They can, the receiving veterinarian, once the client identifies where they're taking the animal, can call the originating veterinarian to follow up and get better communication So there's that also. I mean, if the client can't remember all of the details, they can say, hey, this is, who referred me, and they've got more information. And so that communication could occur as well.
Okay.
Sorry.
I would just also like to bring up the fact that sometimes in your large animal and your equine situations, these areas are remote. So
Yes.
you're not going to have cellular service or anything like that until you get back into an area where you have that coverage. So just bear that in mind as well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too in the text. Yeah, but just, okay.
Okay, any more comment, Jen?
Just to clarify how this is written, is the intent for 4855B2 A and B for the veterinarian to be the actual one to get on the phone and relay information if a medical record is not available, or could it be a representative of the veterinarian, such as RVT, that I were to delegate to get on the phone and call the ER? I'm just curious about if it's verbiage, because we are accepting that it is the client or their authorized agent. Is the veterinarian allowed to appoint someone to do this verbal communication based on their skill? Because I interpret it the way it's written now, that the veterinarian has to be the one on the phone to the other veterinary practice. I don't know if that's intent, but I just wanted to bring up that point.
I think that was the discussion, but I don't see why it would be restricted to that. Tara?
I think it's under subdivision B, the third line down. If requested verbally, keep going down. Direct transfer to another veterinary premises for medical care is recommended. The veterinarian
Yes,
shall.
that's what I'm interpreting. The
Right.
veterinarian, upon release of the animal patient, shall either provide a copy of the summary. If a written record is not available, it is interpreted to my eyes that the veterinarian should be the one on the phone to communicate and not an authorized agent of the veterinarian. I cannot delegate that to an RVT to get on the phone with the ER and at least be on hold or try to take that call and field questions if I'm doing something else.
That is existing law right now.
Under 4855, the requirement right now is specific to the veterinarian. So under A, it says a veterinarian subject to the provision of this chapter as required by the regulation of the board keep a written record. So this whole thing is the onus is on the veterinarian currently.
Well, I would just note that that's requiring initially the veterinarian to create the record. So that necessarily has to be on the veterinarian. But if we're talking about communications of the animal patient's condition or diagnosis, in these emergency situations, would it be better to allow veterinary staff to communicate? Because, if they're out in the field, the veterinarian is now, client, you need to get this horse over to another premises for immediate care. Now I'm moving on to the next horse that there's a problem with. So, in those situations, when the animal arrives and the veterinarian who initially saw the animal is busy, can veterinary staff communicate the diagnosis and other pertinent details of the animal's condition?
Jessica?
I was just going to say to keep, this is in the critical condition. And I think if the veterinarian is already going to be having that discussion with anyone, I think it would be quicker to have that discussion with the receiving veterinarian rather than call their staff to then have a communication with the receiving veterinarian. But they also.
Mark?
I'm almost inclined to keep it as is because it's referring to a situation where there is not a written record available. So if there is a written record available, I'm all in favor of a representative veterinarian to relay the information to the receiving parties. If there's no written record, then it's going to have to be the representative can't read the mind of the veterinarian of what their thought process was. So I would be in favor of the veterinarian being the one to transfer that information if there's no written record.
I think realistically, many of these situations with the horses being referred to another hospital or to a hospital that are in critical condition, that in fact, many of the veterinarians now do have an RVT or the equivalent riding with them. They may be in a truck. And the major thing is to make sure that there's someone at the other place that's going to accept the animal, or if in fact that's where the client wants to go. There are two, like in Southern California, there'd be 2 or 3 different hospitals, and it may be up to the client themselves say, no, I've had a bad experience at the one place. I don't want to go there someplace else. So there's a lot of phone calls that go on, communication, and many times with texts, just to say, hey, I've got a colic, I've got a dystocia, got a horse with a broken leg. Can we send it in? Yes or no? Call me, if you're not available. Many times the veterinarian at that emergency situation is already involved in another emergency, and they're having a tech field those calls too as a triage thing. So generally, I'm not so sure that if we inserted the veterinarian or the representative, and there's a way of communication so that the veterinarian who primarily saw the case is not being subject to discipline. They're trying to do their very best going back and forth. And I think that's what happens most of the time. Most of the veterinarians have referral hospitals, that they send to, and they're in a very good relationship, and they actually know the techs, the RVTs there, and it's a good way to communicate. Is there a problem with inserting the veterinarian or the representative upon release?
And that would be where?
Under B.
Okay.
Another veterinary premise for medical care is recommended the veterinarian or the representative shall release, either provide a copy, because many times it is a representative that's, a horse that's neurologic. They may have a lot of lab tests back already, and it's going to be the office staff is going to, email or text or send the information over to the other hospital in the first place.
Okay. Tara?
I think instead of representative, maybe use, right now it's the veterinarian or the veterinary staff or veterinary personnel, but, let's get it clarified that the person has to be familiar with veterinary healthcare services somehow so that, the communication makes more sense. It's not just somebody's partner who doesn't actually treat animals. If we could change representative to, I don't want to be too specific with RVT or veterinary assistant, but yeah, perhaps veterinary personnel.
I'm sorry, what was the word then? The veterinarian or?
Veterinary personnel
Okay.
or veterinary staff.
And I agree. I think it has to be clear, if we were going to go this route, that it is someone that the veterinarian delegated for communication. So something like the veterinarian or a delegated representative, just kind of like the authorized agent. And again, this is just more covering bases, meaning I am the one that chooses you to speak on my behalf. It can't just be anyone, just like the authorized agent of kind of putting that in there.
Mark?
The point was already made. I was going to say the exact same thing. Should be made clear that the veterinarian recognizes that this person is capable of transmitting that information. It's a delegation of duties.
Okay, so we have a consensus to put that in there. Tara, can you come up with something, or Jessica?
So it sounds like under 2A, you want the receiving veterinarian or,
Up in B.
Yeah, it's under subdivision B, line 3. Change, medical care is recommended, comma, the veterinarian, or, and I don't know where you landed on. Okay, so it would read, medical care is recommended, comma, the veterinarian or their delegated veterinary personnel. I think we need to make sure that it's ownership, the veterinarian who's originating this, it's their staff. Okay. Or their delegated veterinary personnel.
so Justin, if you don't mind going to B and where it says the veterinarian right there, right before that comma. Yep, so the veterinarian or their delegated veterinary personnel.
Personnel, right there. Yeah, okay, got it.
Their delegated veterinary personnel.
Doesn't answer mine. I'm going to go back to mine. I have an answer for mine.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments from the committee?
Yeah. I'm sorry to
Okay, Kathy?
back on the original number, B. Would it be, I'm back to the oral only to a client, which I understand is very limited, probably doesn't happen very often at all, happens, a small percentage of the time. Could we add something to this that says, authorized agent, if the receiving veterinary premises is unknown, with a follow-up in writing as soon as reasonably possible? I understand the broadband situation and things like that, but I also understand the emergency vet immediately moving on to another case while that person's driving away. I'm just still trying to get some more information to the client if they literally don't know the vet they're going to, but they're leaving the premises. I'm trying to envision the scenario. That is in writing. It doesn't need to be a full-blown veterinary record, but some sort of, and I don't want to open this up to veterinarians to be disciplined for unnecessarily, but I also, this leaves it up to the owner, it seems to me, a little more than I'm comfortable with. So I don't know what to say, if that adds to it, makes it worse, better, or whatever, but it just,
So my answer to that is, what difference would that be than the client taking that patient directly to the specialist?
and then the specialist calling.
No,
the-
no, no. I mean,
Oh.
what I'm saying is, this is a very, very, very small subset.
Yeah. it
And if
is.
we're looking at that subset, do we need to write something in here so specific that would make a difference in the situation where the referring veterinarian is out of the picture, the client takes that animal directly to the specialist? The specialist would be getting the information from the client anyway.
Well, they're going to get it orally from the client if the client has nothing from the referring veterinarian, right?
Right. So
And then,
I think we're being too prescriptive in this small subset. And I don't see any difference between that and the client going directly to the specialist. That specialist is going to get the information from the client, maybe not in detail of what the first veterinarian has
Didn't
said, the
say.
referring one, but it's not that, I mean, it's not totally unheard of or unseen.
yeah.
And can I make a comment to that point? If a veterinarian is receiving a transfer or a case with minimal information and wants clarification, most of the time, that's why it's important that we can delegate someone to call and establish communication with that veterinarian while I'm doing an examination or something. There's also the veterinary to veterinary if something just doesn't make sense, especially in emergency situations where clients are in emotional distress. That's why we have that option to do veterinary to veterinary communication if it just doesn't make sense of what's going on. And that's why it's important that, you know, if I have someone that I trust to get on that phone while my hands are on that pet and say, hey, call that clinic and let's get answers on the blood gases or what did they run. So a lot of times that is happening in the background that clients just don't see. So I just wanted to point that out too.
Maybe to be more specific, if you could provide some wording that we could look at, and because we're really talking somewhat abstract here.
And that was the best word, you know. Oh, I'm sorry. That was, and I realized that I know that this is a very small percentage, very, very small percentage of cases, but I also know it's a critical patient, emotional client, and a professional, and just having the client be the go-between. And obviously, they always probably will talk if they possibly can, the referring and the receiving veterinarian, but I just don't like putting so much on the owner.
Right. Christy?
As an emergency hospital, we get both scenarios, right? We get ones that have been referred and we've spoken with the client, with the referring veterinarian, and we get ones that have been sent without getting that referral. And so that just show up, that they came from another veterinarian, but they still just show up. And it is up to our veterinarians to try to still work through the case, and they still have to use their best judgment. And I think that's what Dr. Sullivan's saying is they're still treating the patient.
Yeah.
They still have to treat the patient, and they still have to go off what the client is telling them and the symptoms of the patient. And so we're not really putting the pressure or the onus on the client. It's still about treating the patient. And that's what veterinarians are going to do every time. And so we have to step back and say, where does the pressure go? It's not on the client. It's not the client's responsibility. It's still, no matter what happens, it's always on the veterinarians. So let's stop making it so prescriptive that we're making it harder on the veterinarians. Because it's always going to be harder on the veterinarians to get all of this done. Just do what's best for the patient every time. And they're going to do that no matter what. And that's what they should be doing. So let's start being a board and making sure that we're looking out for that and doing what's best and making it easier for them to do what's best so that we can take care of the consumer that way.
Okay, any other comments from the board, from the committee? Dr.
Yeah, I'm in agreement, Christy, with your philosophy too. Let's try to keep it as simple as we can and understand the workload. And when the case is referred in, or it ends up coming in, and you're trying to make a diagnosis and recommend a treatment, you need to involve the client / owner or the representative. And if they don't understand such and such a term, that's a time for them, for the referring veterinarian to say, well, this is what I meant by when a horse has an encephalomyelitis case, or, this is the differential diagnosis. And this is how we have to do it. And this is where your horse is. I think that's the communication skill. That's why you sent it to where you referred it.
Okay. Kara?
I think this is something that the board could also monitor, if this becomes part of the statute, the board can monitor it through consumer complaints to see if this is actually a problem for clients. And then you can respond accordingly rather than contemplate potential problems and make, crafting this language a lot more difficult. Maybe, we start with these new ways of transferring information for the clients. And then if we identify a problem for the clients later, we can address it at that time.
Okay. All right. Any comment from the public in the room?
Trick Chair. Good morning, Grant Miller, Regulatory Director of the California Veterinary Medical Association. I'd like to make comments regarding 4855.1, if that's okay. We're not there.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, any comments from the public? Moderator, could you open the website?
We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand. And as a reminder to our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find your hand button. First, we're going to hear from the California Veterinary Medical Association. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Director of the California Veterinary Medical Association. Thank you for your time today. And at first, I just want to say I really do, and we really appreciate the work of Dr. Sullivan and Ms. Usry and board staff on this very important regulatory change. Just briefly to address sort of Ms. Bowler's comments, and I think it's already been said in sum and substance, but I just want to reemphasize, having been a part of the task force working on this, that this proposal really is designed to cover exigent circumstances, circumstances that practitioners are not going to frequently find themselves in. So I think to try to formulate additional, more detailed, more possibly prescriptive language risks undoing the beneficial, more understandable, more digestible, more practical framework that the subcommittee has come up with. So I would personally sort of discourage that effort, if I might. As a little bit of wordsmithing, instead of delegated veterinary personnel in that line on subdivision B, I would perhaps recommend using the veterinarian or designated representative. I think that's a little bit more clear, and I'll leave it at that. And thanks again for everyone's time.
Thank you.
Dr. Sullivan,
Just a second.
I didn't hear the introduction, but I think that was Dan Baxter, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was our only request for public comment online.
All right. Thank you, moderator. So I guess discussion on the language.
Or motion.
Well, we got to make sure the language right first. Okay, any further discussion on the language proposed by the different attorneys?
So can you repeat? Designated person.
Yes, I understand.
Oh, I don't.
Sorry.
I'm gonna switch places. Okay.
I don't have the screen.
Is there any legal concerns about delegated veterinary personnel versus delegated representative as proposed by Dan Baxter?
So I think the request was designated representative. And right now the language is delegated veterinary personnel. I recommended veterinary personnel because I think it's, clearer with respect to who should be doing this, like an RVT or a VA. But it's up to you folks to determine which language you prefer. So the options are in front of you, or they're delegated veterinary personnel, or the recommendation was designated representative.
So, Mark, I hope that you have a motion.
I motion to keep the current language. Delegated veterinary.
Do we have a second?
Delegated veterinary personnel.
Well, and the reason why is because I think the delegate relays that I have determined that this person, I'm delegating this task to this person because I think this person is qualified to do the task. I think that the word delegate implies that more than designate does.
Can you rescind your motion so we can have a discussion?
I rescind it. It wasn't seconded, so it doesn't
I know.
work anyways.
Go ahead.
Me?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask to get clarification on the motion, because if he wants it as it's displayed, then there's verbiage that's in the materials for a actual, a full motion.
Do you want me to read all of that then? So you want me to make a motion to, what am I reading?
No, not. We're not done. We're in A.
Is it a, I think I have it. It's a motion to recommend.
Include as part B, veterinarian.
Are we in discussion right now? I just want to clarify.
Go ahead.
He's making a motion.
Got it.
I recommend that the California proposed amend BNP section 4826. I don't know what you're asking.
Wouldn't we just make the motion at the end and just say as amended today,
Right.
like we normally do?
Right.
That's my question.
But I want to accept 4855 as amended.
Okay, so
Be sure what-
would you like me to read a potential motion
Yes,
for you?
please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
The motion is to recommend to the board submission to the California State Legislature, the attached legislative proposal to amend Business and Professions Code Sections 4826.6 and 4855 regarding records as revised at this meeting.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any further discussion from the committee? And from the public in the room? Moderator, could you ask WebEx if there's any comments from the public on WebEx?
Absolutely. We are open for public comment via WebEx on the motion. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Esri?
Yes.
Ms. Bowler? Dr. Getkin?
Yes.
Dr. Grant?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez? Ms. Pulowski?
Yay.
Ms. Shefelt?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Item B, initiate a rulemaking to amend California Code of Regulation, CCR Title 16, Section 2032.3. Background material for item B starts on page 3, which discusses items that were addressed at our January 16th, 2024 meeting. And there have been a lot of fine tuning since then. At one point, several sources asked if financial records were part of the medical record. That issue had numerous ramifications, including proprietary issues, FTC concerns about added cost and time to the practice, and the needs of the consumer. After significant stakeholder comments raised during the public comment at the April board meeting, the board referred the regulatory proposal back to the MDC. As I mentioned earlier, staff has included that public discussion in the packet. The subcommittee met again with CVMA and CHRB to narrow the request that the subcommittee felt was necessary to protect the public while stipulating that it was not the board's intent to have practices modify or make any changes to their existing bookkeeping methods to satisfy these regs. It was also noted by CVMA that it did not appear that there was any enabling statute that would allow the board to write regs to address a request of financial records. After considering the totality of the concerns, the subcommittee no longer recommends adding the client payment records to the record-keeping requirement. We removed the proposed subsection 0 of section 2032.3 B1 and K of B2, both of which read, and I quote, "Any estimates or invoices provided to the client or their authorized agent and all client payments related to services and treatment provided," unquote. In other words, we've removed that from the proposal that we had in our April meeting. However, the subcommittee believes consumers still should receive a copy, be able to receive a copy of all payments within a reasonable amount of time when requested, and agreed that it had to be in statute. As such, the subcommittee is proposing adding BPC section 4855.1, which we will discuss in a minute. With attachment 2, background material, and attachment 3, which is the amended changes to the April MDC meeting, we can discuss this agenda item 5B, which is the rulemaking for 2032.3. As I've mentioned, subsection O on the top of page 11 of April's proposal and subsection K on the top of page 12 are what we removed. In addition to that, I could only find one other item that was on the April proposal that has been removed, and that is on page 18. 18 subsection B, the words "responsible for the animal patient receiving services" was removed from the last line that now reads, "authorized verbally or in writing by the client or their authorized agent." What we removed was superfluous. It just wasn't necessary. Other than those three things, I did not find anything else that is different from the April presentation till today. So with that, I will open it up for discussion for the committee. Any comments from the public in the room? Moderator, could you ask WebEx if there are any public comments from there?
We are once again open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. Is there anyone on the committee that could make a motion? Kathy?
There we go. Sure. I think this is right. I would like to move to approve the proposed regulatory text to amend California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 2. Is that wrong?
Start with to recommend to the board, take the following
Oh, I
actions.
forgot. Yeah, we have to recommend it. Oh, yeah. Okay, request review the attached real proposal and entertain a motion. I'd like to motion to recommend to the board to take the following actions. To approve the proposed regulatory text to amend California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 2032.3. If legislative amendments to Business and Professional Code Sections 4826.6 and 4855 are enacted to remove the summary requirement direct staff to submit the regulatory text to the department, excuse me, the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business and Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. And if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations as noticed for California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 2032.3.
Second.
The motion has been made and seconded. Any discussion on the committee? Any discussion from the public? Moderator, could you ask the public on WebEx if there's any comments or discussion?
We are open for public comment on the motion. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand. And as a reminder to our mobile device users, you may need to hit the ellipses button, that's the ... in order to find that hand button. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue with the motion?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Esri?
Yes.
Ms. Bowler?
Aye.
Dr. Getkin?
Aye.
Dr. Grant?
Yes.
Nunez?
Yes.
Ms. Pulaski?
Yay.
Ms. Shefelt?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, proposed legislation to add BPC 4855.1. As mentioned previously, the subcommittee believed that the consumer should be able to get a copy of whatever records that the veterinary premises has related to payments made for veterinary services. We also agree that this requirement does not fit in the regulatory framework of written records and therefore needs to be placed in statute. In addition, the subcommittee believes a longer time frame than 5 days to provide copies of payment would help lessen the burden without sacrificing consumer protection, since the payments are not related to a specific treatment or care provided and are not necessarily for continuity of care. Based on the above, the subcommittee proposes adding a new Business Profession Code section as follows: 4855.1. Within 30 days of receiving a written or verbal request by the client or their authorized agent, the veterinary premises shall provide a record of client payments made to the veterinary premises related to services and treatment provided, unquote. After publishing this with the agenda, we received a letter from CVMA with public comment, which is entered into the record today. The recommendation is, and I quote, "A record of client payments made to the veterinary premises related to services and treatment provided must be maintained for a minimum of 3 years after the animal's last visit," unquote. The subcommittee agrees with this addition. In the CVMA's proposal, it was the first sentence of the statute. We believe that it would fit better if it was the last sentence, but we definitely agree with the addition. Any discussion from the board? So I believe we have it on the screen, right?
Justin, would you mind sharing the version with CVMA's incorporated request?
I don't think we have it up there yet. Mark,
So, pardon my naivete, but is the request for keeping the financial records similar to the requirement for medical records? Is it 3 years?
Yes.
Okay.
Kathy?
I can't recall this, I should. What was the logic for the 30 days?
Just simply,
Something shorter.
it's giving them up to 30 days. So it's just allowing the staff to produce this for the client without saying in 5 days. I mean, that's really restrictive and it's business records. So we did not feel that 30 days was a burden. And as far as the client's concerned, it's the main purposes of this would be for insurance and
Well, that's my question is, sometimes clients really rely on getting insurance, paid back. So perhaps 14 days would be a little better. I realize it's usually you get an invoice at the time of service, and I'm not talking about it in the, herd situations per se. That's a little different, but I just seem like since clients sometimes rely on insurance to cover them, so different insurance covers it differently, maybe 14 days is a little bit better because they can at least turn in their documents sooner and get reimbursed sooner. 30 seemed a bit far out depending on the cost of the treatment.
Yeah.
So that's why I wondered why 30 was selected. I get that it's convenient, but maybe we can split the difference, so.
okay. Well, when I was in practice, I got a lot of insurance requests and they were way longer than 30 days. So
I agree, and I'm like the worst to turn it in, but there are other clients that really need it, right? They have to pay it out and then they need the reimbursement. And we want them to do that and we want them to treat their pets. So that's the only, I got a stack that I should have turned in months ago. And California fortunately has the law that, you can turn it in up to a year, but just seemed like I was thinking about the clients that don't,
Okay.
that really could use the reimbursement right away.
is it up there? Yeah. I can't see it. So.
And I
So
do
we-
think it's up
We have
there.
it on the screen and we've flipped the two sentences around. So any comment from the committee, both on the proposed language and also the length of time? Jen?
And this is just for clarification, from an enforcement side, when we say, when the verbiage states a record of client payments made to the veterinary premises related to services, is that mean a record that the Visa card was charged $638? Or are we talking about a detailed invoice records? Because those are two different things. And I know right now complainants are sometimes putting in the Visa of 638, and sometimes it's more detailed of subcutaneous fluids. So I'm just reading this verbiage and just want clarification of what the intent is on that actual record.
So the intent is whatever the practice has, it's not prescriptive. If your bookkeeping is X, Y, or Z, it is whatever it is. It's not to request or demand that the practice institute new bookkeeping. It's whatever that system is for that practice. Mark?
To that point, assuming that oftentimes this is related to complaints or a certain scenario, if there is a payment made, there wouldn't be any way of knowing if that payment is for that particular visit in question or whether or not it was for a past due amount that they had. So should there be some thought into what that payment is for, or which particular service the payment was for?
I think if you're talking about a disciplinary case, then that request would be made there. We're not asking for that level. What we're asking for is to address what a client would need for insurance or any other proof that they've made a payment. Jessica?
And the sentence ends with related to the services and treatment provided.
That
So
would
it's
cover
for that specific instance. It's not going to be for something that they did years and years ago. So it narrows it down.
And for the sake of making the consumer whole after an action, I understand this. And I think I am getting a little confused because usually for insurance, which has been thrown around today, they do usually ask for more detailed and not just the 638. So I think that's where my confusion is, because I think those are two different things. So if we're just keeping this with the intent of making the consumer whole, that's what I was just clarifying.
Well, I don't think we can ask the veterinarian or the practice to do more than what they already have. We want to make sure that the interpretation of this is not that everyone has to change their bookkeeping to a certain format to give X, Y, and Z. It's whatever system you're using. That's what the client is asking. Now, client has already received some acknowledgement that they've made a payment. So this is a backup to that. Nothing more, nothing less. That's the intent.
And I think that's what I was trying to say here with Kathy, is that this is not, they've already received the first payment. When they left the first time, they received a copy of their treatment. They got that. They were given a copy. That's the assumption we're making, correct? We're making the assumption when they left the first time and they received the treatment, they got a copy of their treatment, invoicing, whatever. But this is now making an assumption that they're coming back and I no longer have it. I no longer have it. So we're saying 30 days because we're putting it back on them that we gave this to you as a veterinary hospital. Now, as a client, I've misplaced it. And so I am not responsible enough to keep it. So that's kind of what we're saying in this statement.
I wanted to confirm the current law requires, after services provided, invoice to be provided to the client.
No, that's the reason we're writing it.
So
is
it
because-
does not, you could just get a tab that says you were charged X amount or whatever, like a slip, okay. Even though we know
Making-
most vets do
We are
that, of
making a
course.
requirement here. There was no
But we're
existing
saying it's 30 days after, right,
after the request,
after the request.
not after the service,
after the
after the
service.
request. Tara?
Oh.
Okay. Any further comments or questions from the committee? Okay, from the public in the room.
Grant Miller, Regulatory Director, California Veterinary Medical Association. Thank you very much for incorporating our 11th hour comment letter into the discussion today. I actually printed copies of it if it would be convenient for your committee. Thank you. So in that, thank you for already acknowledging the suggested amendment that we wanted to make regarding the 3-year statute of limitations to match that of current medical records. Also, we'd like to point out that we are seeking clarification to ensure that the licensee manager of the registered veterinary premises would ultimately be responsible for that. So thank you for those considerations. In response to Ms. Bowler's comments relating to insurance, I'd like to remind this committee that only 1 out of every 5 pets in California is insured. And my concern regarding the nature of this conversation is that when we're discussing pet insurance, you're not talking about consumer protection as much as you are talking about consumer convenience. And I am concerned about where this board wants to go in relation to accommodating consumers in that regard. When the CVMA discussed this 4855.1 proposal, we saw the validity in it based on consumer protection, in that some people don't understand what they have paid for, and they need to know that. And we do feel that the language, as Ms. Sieverman has pointed out, is clear that it's not just about the payment, it's payment in relation to a service or treatment, so they have to be coupled. From our understanding of the reading, it's not only about what the client paid, but then what did they pay for? And that's, I believe, the intention of consumer protection. And so we believe that that language does adequately address what we thought to be the intent of the subcommittee in bringing this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any moderators on WebEx from the public, please?
Yes, there is. We are now taking public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from Nancy Elrich. Hold on just a moment. We're sending you a request to unmute your microphone.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, I just have a suggestion that the wording currently where the licensing manager shall provide, since most licensing managers or many licensing managers aren't even on the premises, I think that wording is a little bit impractical. And I would recommend that you change it to licensing manager shall ensure that a record of client payments, blah, blah, blah. So that makes them responsible for it being done, but it doesn't require that they actually do it themselves. That's it.
Thank you.
And that was our only request for public comment.
Okay. We don't have to respond.
No, but you could have it, see if there's a discussion
Okay.
before a motion.
Okay, is there, we haven't had a motion.
You haven't had a motion.
Okay.
Can you bring the,
Okay, any further discussion from the committee on comments?
can you bring that language back up on screen?
Yeah.
Yep. I don't see how Nancy's concern. I don't read that the licensing manager has to be on site on how it's written.
Okay, any further comments?
I think Nancy was saying kind of is the same vein of the veterinarian or their delegated person can do that. The way it reads, the licensing manager of the veterinary premises shall provide. So instead of that, shall ensure the hospital provides or something. I'm not exactly clear on the language she was looking at. but-
She was saying ensures, the licensing manager ensures, because they're not usually on the premises. So that's what she was trying to say. And I understand what she's saying. However, my interpretation is that it is the licensee manager's responsibility for everything on that premises. So they have to ensure that would be my understanding. It's their responsibility to make sure. So I absolutely agree that it is their responsibility to ensure that these things are happening. However, it's their responsibility. That hospital is their responsibility. So I think that's implied.
And they have 30 days to do it.
Okay, any other comments? Or motion?
So clarifying question, or motion for what's on our screen correct?
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify that. Let me.
I'll make the motion, I guess, if I'm looking at the right
You.
thing here. I hope I am. Motion for the board to entertain submission of the California State Legislature, a legislative proposal to add BPC section 4855.1 regarding client payment records as amended today. Yeah.
And I second that well-made motion.
Okay, any other comment from the committee? Any public comment from the room? Moderator, could you please ask if WebEx, if there's any public comment from WebEx?
We are open for public comment once again. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please.
Dr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Ms. Essery,
Yes.
Ms. Bowler,
Aye.
Dr. Getkin,
Aye.
Dr. Grant,
Yeah, aye.
Dr. Nunez,
Yes.
Ms. Pulaski,
Aye.
Mr. Phelps,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. We're going to take a 15-minute break right now. Thank you, moderator. Now that we're back in order, back to order, we'll start next with agenda item 6, update and discussion from the Complaint Audit Subcommittee. Dr. Getkin.
Hi, thank you. So the last quarterly board consultant roundtable was on May 22nd, 2024. Consultants perform an initial evaluation of a case file to determine whether there exists a potential departure from the standard of care. Right now, we are at 5 veterinary consultants, if I'm not mistaken. If there is a potential standard deviation from the standard of care, that consultant will put that case in a line for a subject matter expert to take a look at. If the consultant at that time deems no departure from the standard of care, they will write a report at that time to close the case themselves. Since March 2024, consultants have reviewed a total of 270 cases. Of those, 168 of those were closed as no violation, 11 were closed as educational, and 91 were referred to the line for the experts. There were 770 cases awaiting consultant review at that time of 530 respondents. The next day, there was a quarterly expert roundtable on May 23rd for subject matter experts. Subject matter experts are invited to these gatherings to give them a venue to ask questions about the review process, as well as field any case-specific scenarios with other experts. The expert consultants are at that meeting, as well as the board's DAG liaison, Neva Tassan, who was present to clarify and add to the discussion from her perspective. Since the March 2024 subject matter expert roundtable, experts reviewed 96 cases, 9 of which were closed as no violation, 30 of those were closed as educational, 4 resulted in citation of 3 respondents, and 53 were referred to the Attorney General's office. There were 895 cases awaiting consultant review of 513 respondents at that time. So at the quarterly expert roundtable on May 23rd, topics included timeliness of expert reviews, proper usage of the expert worksheet to track hours, addressing all allegations levied in a complaint filed, report formatting, and what to do when you receive an illegible record from a respondent.
All right, Mark?
I just had a question. On page 1, you said staff also covered some of the finer points of the consultant review process, such as utilizing the box. What's the box?
Should I answer this?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, please.
This is my first rodeo, so. The box is a secure electronic server that cases and reports are put into that experts and subject matter experts and consultants remotely tap into to get all the case files, reports, all the information. They also submit their reports via the box in lieu of paper.
I'm familiar. I just had never heard it called the box. But thank you.
Dr. Sullivan,
Yes.
on the same educational thing is, explain to me what a closed educational case would be like, or why, what determines that they're closed?
Go ahead.
I'm looking at Jessica, she's looking at me. So I can start this, and Jessica, please feel free to chime in. Closed educational means that there is no violation of the standard of care performed in veterinary. Well, no, I take that back. It is, I'm going to defer this to Jessica. They decide, enforcement decides after the report what is actually brought up. So this is actually out of the hands of the veterinarians making this report.
Yeah, so when we get a subject matter expert report, and there's 2 times that they could be closed educational, and the first one is referencing when consultants are recommending minor deviations from the standard of care specific to record keeping. So that would be the only instance when it's closed at the consultant review, is if they review everything and they find no departures from the standard of care, but they do see minor medical record violations. At that time, they would just say what those minor medical record violations are, and then our team would write up an educational letter to let the licensee know that this case has been closed, but we did find these minor violations, and they're educated on what the laws are, but there's no action taken. When it comes to something that's reviewed by a subject matter expert, they can also opine that there's been a deviation of the standard of care that could include medical records, but typically it's really about the treatment that was provided. But it wasn't egregious, and it might have, there's a lot of factors that the team looks at when considering what the next appropriate action is. And if we can resolve the case in an educational letter rather than citation or formal discipline, then we'll do that.
Okay. Anything else? Okay.
Just one comment. I think under the quarterly expert roundtable, the numbers at the bottom say 895 cases awaiting consultant review, and I think that should be expert review potentially. I don't know if it matters, but because under the consultant, yeah, anyway.
Okay, agenda item 7. Ready? Yeah, Kathy?
I just, on this whole area, I just wanted to applaud once again our subject matter experts and the staff. The number of cases, the number of pending things for review is just astronomical, really, and compared to any other state. And so I know that this subcommittee and the staff have done a really good job at increasing and educating and training subject matter experts, but they're such a key to the entire case analysis that I just wanted to say congratulations. I know when you hear those numbers, 800 and whatever, right? It's like, oh my God, we're never going to dig out. But you already have done a great job, and that's a lot to do with Jessica's staff. So
Thank you for that. Okay, item.
I had a question. There are 5 consultants now. Is that a good number? Are we satisfied? Are we looking for more? We have all the subjects covered?
So I think we could always use more, but I think when it comes to priority, we really need more subject matter experts. The consultants are the ones reviewing them to see whether or not they need to go to a subject matter expert.
Okay, so
We really have the backlog significantly is more in the subject matter expert side.
then how are we doing with the subject matter experts?
We always need more.
Speaking from experience, we need specialists. Specialists, specialists, specialists.
And what are we doing to find them?
Ask your friends, your neighbors, and your colleagues. Personally ask. Call them up. Tell them why it's important and ask them.
Any field in particular or just
Because I've done it.
internal medicine, dermatology, ophthalmology,
Ev-
all of them?
Everything, especially neuro and cardio. But I think we are in a desperate need. I do use my local VMA meetings as a reminder to my fellow colleagues out there that we need subject matter experts. But I don't think it could be stated enough, the need for it. The reason that many veterinarians, or I'll speak for myself, do this is because there's a backlog. The reason there's a backlog is we need veterinarians to be the ones reviewing the case. So this is a vicious cycle in which we have 1,000 complaints waiting and consumers and veterinarians waiting for closure. But we don't have veterinarians enough to go through this. So the only way to make progress is if more veterinarians step up to do this.
And I explained, so I put out a call to cardiologists and I said to them and the surgeons, and I said, do you want to be reviewed by somebody who doesn't know, or do you want to be reviewed by a peer who can, because we're all going to get complaints in our life. This is what happens. And so we want to be reviewed by a peer who has knowledge and skills, that knows what they're doing and can understand. And so I say, to be able to give back to your profession, then this is the way to do it. And they actually did it. I put out a call for cardiologists, and Jessica was able to get the cardiologist to review. So, and actually, one cardiologist called another, and then I called another cardiologist, and I think we got quite a few cardiologists from reaching out from that. So it just, they really do, they know it, they understand it. And I actually got one who said, he said, I think I know that's in my inbox, and I've seen that call. I never deleted it, but now I know it's necessary. I knew I needed to do that.
Okay, any public comment related to item 6? Moderator, could you ask to see if there's any public comment on WebEx from the public, please?
We are once again open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, you wish to continue?
Yes, please. Thank you. Agenda item 7, update on MDC subcommittee appointments and tasks to implement the board's 2024-2028 strategic plan. The board had a strategic plan session to develop those priorities for 2024 to 2028. From that document, we were able to divide up the workload across our team. I was really relieved when I noticed it went through 2028. At first, I thought it was just for this coming year. However, we are starting right away. Somehow, I believe that the board will come up with other ideas to pass on too. So as you can see from the list, some of these subcommittees are ones that that you are familiar with, and others are new, but are self-explanatory by the lists of their tasks. The unlicensed practice subcommittee is new and has some great challenges. Hopefully, we can finish the medical records subcommittee soon. And I think we have missed the minimum standards for alternate veterinary premises subcommittee. But again, I think we're at the final stages of that. The CDFA Veterinary Medical Board Subcommittee is somewhat new. It's expanding their tasks from just the animal blood banks. So it's a little bit more formal now. And the National Examination Subcommittee is new and I think is important and needs to provide some oversight on what is going on at the national level. Again, great group of people from top to the bottom. And I'm looking forward to great work from these subcommittees and continued collaboration with our stakeholders. Any additional comments, Jessica? Okay. Any comments from the committee? Everybody looks scared. Any comments from the public in the room? Moderator, could you ask if there's any comments from the public in WebEx?
We are open for public comment on agenda item 7. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of your screen. Dial-in users, dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you. Next agenda item is number 8, update discussion of potential recommendations from the inspection subcommittee. Jenny and Christy.
Hello. Okay, so part of the Veterinary Medical Board's 2020 and 2024 through 2024 strategic plan included a goal to evaluate the feasibility of the mandate in Business and Professions Code section 4809.7, requiring the board to inspect at least 20% of veterinary premises on an annual basis. In 2022, the subcommittee presented the history of the requirement, including the board's inability to ever meet the percent mandate due to insufficient funds and the subcommittee's research on the comparison to all other state veterinary boards and DCA entities' inspection programs. The subcommittee concluded the statutory inspection mandate was unrealistic and unattainable. The subcommittee noted the numerous process improvements the board was implementing and discussed the $600,000 grant the California Department of Technology awarded to the board and the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology. The grant was for the development of a mobile inspection app, which was predicted to significantly streamline the inspection process for the inspectors and board staff. The subcommittee's work was placed on hold until the various process improvements and the mobile inspection app was implemented. The app is currently in development and user acceptance testing is scheduled to begin this month. And the app is scheduled to launch at the end of September. During the board's strategic planning session in October 2023, the board discussed the subcommittee's prior findings and decided to include the following objective in the board's 2024 through 2028 strategic plan. So 4.4 is to pursue legislation to remove the 20% veterinary premises inspection mandate. The board approved its 2024 through 2028 strategic plan during its April meeting. And in June, with the assistance of the DCA Solid Training Services Unit, board staff developed its action plan to implement the strategic plan. Ms. Sieferman met with the MDC chair and vice chair to go over potential subcommittee tasks and appointments. Obviously, we just heard that Dr. Gedkin and I were appointed to the subcommittee. And we met on June 25th to review reports from the previous subcommittee members and the progress the board had made in inspection since the inspection and enforcement units merged in 21 and 22, and various process improvements were implemented in 22-23. As demonstrated below in the graph, when compared to the initial unit merge, the board increased its inspections by 182% in 22-23 and 343% in 23 and 24. The mobile inspection app which will again launch in September, is expected to increase the number of inspections conducted as well. While this is significant improvement compared to prior years, it is still nowhere near the 20% inspection mandate set in BPC section 4809.7. During its meeting, the subcommittee also discussed the board's strategic plan objective to move the 20% mandate and and the potential amendments to BPC section 4809.7. In addition to striking the percent mandate as the board requested, the subcommittee proposes adding "and announced" to the statute to clarify the board performs announced and unannounced inspections. So as such, the subcommittee proposes the following amendment. So 4809.7, it's up on the screen, would read, the board shall establish a regular inspection program that will provide for random unannounced and announced inspections of veterinary premises. To provide assurances to the public, the California State Legislature and stakeholders that inspections of veterinary premises will continue to remain a priority and continue to be tracked, the subcommittee is considering adding an inspection performance measure goal that will be regularly monitored and reported on at every board meeting. We also will evaluate ways to prioritize random routine inspections, and things that we discussed were randomly selected from veterinary premises registered with the board within the last year, or those that have not been inspected within the last 5 years. This information can be added to the board's sunset review report by the October 2024 meeting to further support the legislative proposal. In addition, the subcommittee has been assigned the following strategic plan objectives. Update the self-inspection checklist to help licensees remain in compliance with regulations, and explore solutions to clarify the board's authority to inspect board facilities. So if we are in agreement with that, we have a proposal.
Okay, any comments or discussion from the board? I mean, for the committee.
Historically, why was 20% included? I mean, is that what they use for other?
I personally hate this question, but yeah. It's like, well,
Tensions with this 20%. At the time, there were, because of the lack of staff and the sort of not the great procedures, and it was very hard. There were many premises that had never been inspected, or there were long delays. So somewhere we came up with this 20%, knowing it was going to be very hard to achieve, but really we didn't realize that it was impossible to achieve. But I think we did it with the best intentions for public protection of, inspecting premises, educating practitioners, and protecting the public. It just wasn't feasible. And then, of course, COVID and everything else, and really lack of staff and lack of was just hard to achieve that. So it became, but it was locked in. We put it into a sunset review, I think, way back when, thinking that this was going to be good, and it just wasn't. It wasn't. I think, Mark, Dick.
I think there was also motivation that by doing that, we would get more funding and be able to hire more people. And, that didn't pan out that well.
Yeah, that's true. We thought if we had a goal in there, would get us, but it really didn't work that way.
What precipitates an inspection of a facility? I mean, they're just down the road, the inspectors are going that way, and we're going to do a bunch, or is it because someone raised a flag the way the practice had a bunch of complaints, or?
Two ways. It could be done from a complaint that we get. We call those CRIs, complaint-related inspections, or we have a random way to select them randomly for all of the facilities. So they're both. I just wanted to add to the history. This has been an issue since it was identified in 2003 in the 2003 sunset report. At that time, the board was doing 13%, and there was a concern that that wasn't enough. And so I believe in 2012, they changed the mandate to where instead of the 13%, they changed it to that the board shall make every effort to inspect at least 20% of the veterinary premises. But it should be noted that even in 2003, it was said that they did not have the funds to increase it anymore, but then did not put anything in there to increase the fees to increase our fund. And then in 2012, there was the statute that said that they'll make every reasonable effort to increase it to do 20%. And at that time noted that they still also did not have the funds to do that. And so then in 2017, there was a bill introduced that said that it would shall inspect at least 20% of the veterinary premises. So they changed it to make every reasonable effort to actually do it. There was a concern at that time that the board didn't have funds and it didn't pass. And then in the next sunset bill, it was put in and it passed. So all of this time it was discussed that it's an issue. They want us to do more. We don't have the funds to do it, but then never actually gave the board funds to do it.
So when you pay a veterinary premise fee each year, is that money earmarked for inspections? Or it just goes into a sort of a general fund then?
It goes into the board's special fund to help pay for the operations of the board, but it's not enough to cover in increasing the amount of inspections necessary to meet the percent mandate. So if the board did want to meet that mandate, you would have to increase the premises registration fees quite significantly. And this is what the board had discussed at their October strategic planning session, that they just would rather remove the mandate, still make it a priority, but don't have the mandate in statute.
Mark?
I had some questions about the app. First of all, kudos to whoever applied for that $600,000 grant from the Department of Technology. I assume it was Jessica that applied for that grant. There's always two parts to achieving our hospital inspection goals. One is getting the inspectors out there and actually performing the inspection. And the other part is what happens after the inspection is completed. In other words, hearing back from the hospitals that they've come into compliance with the violations and so forth. Will the app be able to have both ends of that process?
Yeah, and so if you recall, when I started in July of 2018, one of the biggest concerns that we raised was the inspectors were going out and they were doing the inspections. I think they were doing like 800 or being assigned 800 inspections to do. They would go to a certain point and then be told that we don't have funds to support it and stop. And then what they were able to do, our team wasn't able to keep up with. And so it caused a significant delay to where by the time our team got to it, it could have been 2 years later. And by then, it's really not that helpful, both from a consumer standpoint and the licensee themselves to educate them on what was incorrect. And so what this app is going to do is as the inspector is going through and they're marking down what the concerns were, they would tie it right to the violation, take a picture of the violation, tie it to the actual statute or regulation that was violated, put it into a report. It'll be provided to the licensees or the office manager, whoever's walking through it with them. They'll be given the 30 days to correct. They provide that to the inspector. The inspector will opine on whether or not they are now in compliance. If they deem it into compliance, they'll close it in the app itself, which then has an interface directly to our Breeze system, which will close it on the Breeze system and not wait for our team to do anything. The only time our team would get involved in this, the inspector had said that they submitted correction documents, they're still not in compliance. They would close it in a certain way that we're training them to close it. That'll also go into do an interface into our system, close it on the inspection side, open an enforcement record, and then we assign it to an analyst. So there's going to be essentially no waiting period from the time the inspector is to the time our team is opening a case.
Wow, so we should be able to do 90%.
I don't know about
With technology like
let's
that.
simmer down a bit.
No, I do recall when we made that 20% proposal that it was related to budget change proposals and trying to get more funding. If we remove that 20%, it's not going to affect our funding, correct?
So I think at the time I think there was just a misunderstanding or miscommunication of the difference between a budget change proposal and the fund. And a budget change proposal can get approved if you have money in your fund to pull from. And so even if you had the budget change proposal to say, I want to get this much money, if your fund doesn't support it, it's not going to be successful. And so that's why I think that there was that disconnect, thinking that, okay, well, if we make it a mandate, that gives us the funding. When it doesn't, if your fund doesn't have the money, the only way to put money in the fund is to increase your fees.
Okay, so removing that requirement is not going to affect our budget?
No.
Okay.
Jenny?
I'd also like to point out, as a former inspector from when this passed up through a few years ago, there are just factors that you cannot plan for. For example, 20% or X amount of inspections depends on how many inspectors you have. We keep our inspectors local to the county. If we have 5 active inspectors now, maybe one is willing to travel, you have to compensate for that too. So the thing with any mandate is, at one point, I think we had 15 inspectors, way back when, is that if you can't recruit an inspector for that region is going to largely stay uninspected. So there are qualifications to be an inspector. You have to be a DVM or RVT. You have to have been in clinical practice. And quite frankly, you have to be eloquent enough to be going in on behalf of the Veterinary Medical Board as well. So this just, of course, 20%, it's just not going to happen, but just anything mandated in this, we are ultimately relying on having a qualified inspector in your area or in that area to be able to inspect. And that is just a wild card from year to year. So that is something that has to be taken into account as well, especially because I truly believe the inspectors are your boots on the ground representation of the medical board.
Kathy?
One more thing, it's just so exciting that the app is going to happen September, so this, I just remember when Jessica applied with her team, they had to do like a Shark Tank situation. They had to sell it. They really went all out, and getting this grant is huge. It was huge because having gone on inspections the way it was being done before, hard paper, even when they moved to iPads, there was just such a disconnect. And this, I hope the app, there'll probably be some bugs in it, but I'm hoping that it's going to work great. But I just want to congratulate. We would not have this app if it were not for Jessica and her staff. Some other board might have gotten it, but not ours. So thank you, Jessica.
The app powered by Microsoft?
What?
Is the app powered by Microsoft?
By Microsoft?
Is it powered by Microsoft?
There's no blue screen of death.
No, absolutely.
Okay, if there are no other comments, we'll open it up for comments in the room.
We need a motion.
Oh, I see. We have an action item. Right.
I have my glasses, sorry. So I will make a motion to entertain a motion to recommend to the board submission to the California State Legislature the above legislative proposal to amend BPC section 4809.7 regarding veterinary premises inspection authority.
Okay, there's been a motion made and seconded. Any discussion from the committee? Okay, any discussion from the public in the room? Moderator, could you ask if there are any comments from the public on WebEx?
We are open for public comment via WebEx. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to continue?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Dr. Sullivan?
Yes.
Ms. Esri?
Yes.
Ms. Bowler? Dr. Getkin?
Aye.
Dr. Grant?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Ms. Pulowski?
Aye.
Ms. Shefelt?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Action item 9. Future agenda items and meeting dates.
So for future agenda items, you can refer to the not so short list of items under 7. But if you do have any additional items you'd like to be added, please let us know. And the meeting dates are all posted on our website through October of 2025.
Discussion from Kathy.
Actually, no, it's maybe a new business. I just have a random informational question that talking about this app reminded me. Jessica, another thing you were very responsible for was getting our vet board in with the other healing art boards in that sort of the demographic study of licensees. I don't even remember how it was being, but it was a few years ago, and I'm just wondering if there's any progress on that or if that's reported somewhere.
So I can add that onto a future agenda item to give
Oh,
that
we can't
update.
even talk about it. Okay, got it, got it.
Okay. Mark?
Did you say that there was a list of future agenda items?
No, I was referring to the list of tasks that the MDC will be working on because those are all going to be future agenda
Okay.
items.
There's not a link to that.
Yeah, that,
On it's the materials for agenda item 7. Oh, but there's not a separate link, no.
Okay.
okay, if there's no other comments from the committee, any comments from the public in the room? Operator, could you ask if there's any public comments on WebEx, please?
We are open for public comment. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise a hand by tapping that hand button at the bottom of the screen. Dial-in users dial *3 to raise a hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests.
Should be delivered here shortly.
We're going to take a few more seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request, do you wish to continue with the agenda?
Yes, thank you. At this point, it's time for adjournment. Thank you, everybody, for your work and commitments. Thank you.